Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 67 of the Rewilded Human podcast. We have an incredibly amazing guest for you guys today. We have the beautiful Emilee Saldaya with us, who is the founder of the Freebirth Society. Now, we'll be talking about birth, natural birth, and also her incredible story about why she left the medical establishment to help women all over the world rewild, get back to their roots, and have babies the way nature intended. I will also be sharing my own birth story, my home birth story, and see how that compares to what Emilee's teaching. So you won't want to miss a single moment. Please do watch until the very end. You will love this episode. So let's dive right in.
Welcome to the Rewilded Human podcast, where Dr. Lucille, holistic psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and Dr. Lynn, naturopath and nutritional consultant, help you reconnect with your true self through practical tips on mental health, nutrition, exercise, relationships, and spirituality. With a dash of humor, they tackle today's toughest issues to guide you back to a harmonious, vibrant life.
Emilee, welcome to the Rewilded podcast, Rewilded Human podcast. It's so nice to have you here with us, with Dr. Lucille. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started the Freebirth Society?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your interest in this. Oh, so you want the long version or the short version?
We want the long version.
Okay.
The long version, absolutely. All the details.
Okay. So I began my work in birth very young. So I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I'll give you the quick cliff notes of the early years to get me into the birth work. So I dropped out of high school at 16 and just had this real call to independence and to know life beyond living under my parents' roof. And so I'll never forget that my boyfriend and I had been working at Panera Bread, which is a little cafe chain.
I remember those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those, yeah.
We had $2,000 saved. At 16, we were like, what can't we do? You know, like what can't we do with $2,000? We could move anywhere. You know, the world just felt like ours with that amount of money. And we had this crappy Chevy Blazer and $2,000. So we were like, we're going to go start our life. And so we did. We dropped out of high school, drove cross country, camped in our car, got to LA, got an apartment. Somehow he was 15 and I was 16. Got an apartment. Yeah, well, just by a couple months. And he got a job in the film industry. No one knew his age. It's a pretty cool story. And then I went to massage school and then I took infant massage training. And so that's what led me on this path. So I was always the girl in the neighborhood holding the babies. And you know, I always knew I wanted to be a mother. My mother was a very happy mother, which, you know, now in my adulthood, in my coaching practice and you know, being alive at 39, I'm very aware of how lucky I was to have a happy mom who she loved birth, she loved nursing, she loved raising her children. So that was a really important imprint on my consciousness. And another cute thing about my childhood is I used to have these 3 imaginary friends, and I knew that they were my children when I was a kid. So I would talk with them knowing that they were coming later, which is kind of weird, you know, and fun.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, it's kind of
cute.
And
you have 3 children now?
I'm pregnant with my 3rd.
Oh, congratulations.
Wow. Yeah. Congratulations.
So very young, I find myself in the yoga community of LA, and my big sisters, my friends are all, you know, a little bit older than me because I'm so young. Some of them start to get pregnant and they know I'm interested in the birth and mothering world. So they invite me along to be, you know, just like their little sister at birth. And that was very positive for me. I was very honored to be there. I saw a handful of relatively low intervention home births. And the quick version here, because there's more interesting stuff to get to, but I very just naively jump into this birth world. I was initiated, I would say, relatively positively. You know, I was initiated through home birth. Now looking back, with where I'm at now, I could critique it. It was still medically managed and all of that. But, you know, at 16, I didn't have any language. I didn't have any training. So I get initiated through home birth. And then I go to my first hospital birth, having no idea what that world is like. And it was with my friend, and it was a very classic induction turned coerced C-section. And it was brutal. And it was my first time in the medical world. It was my first time with nurses and doctors. And the way that they spoke to this mother, the way that they lied to this mother. I mean, I was kind of a fly on the wall because I was so new at all of this, but I was floored. And I just didn't know that it was so horrible in the hospital. So I leave that birth after several days, and I feel a real commitment bloom in me. And it was like I had faced the evil of my work, and I got a little whiff of it, and it gave me the perspective of how serious this is, how big this is. I knew that what I had witnessed was wrong. What I didn't realize was that this was just hospital birth. I didn't know yet. And so I made a real commitment, or a commitment was made in me to devote my life to this and to devote my life to understanding what I just saw, and to obviously, hopefully, help, turn the wheel a bit. So I'm 17, maybe 18, something at this point. And I just dive in. For the next 10 years, I go to hundreds of births, hundreds and hundreds of births in every possible setting. The title I take on is doula. I am also apprenticing under a very busy medical midwife. And what's important to say here is that I'm, like all of us, until we see other options, I'm pitched through the birth community, I'm pitched the idea that the most natural way, the most conscious, holistic birth available is a home birth with a medical midwife. That's the edge.
Yes, correct.
There's nothing beyond that. So, okay. So I figure, okay, then I'm going to become a medical midwife. This is my path. I start and stop several medical midwifery schools in that time. And I could never do it because very quickly you're learning vaginal exams. You're learning, how to Doppler the mother. And this is paired with me going to births, at the same time, all the time. And I spent 10 years on call, just really a lot, really a lot of births. And so I'm getting a very wide scope of obstetrics, and then the branches of obstetrics, which I would include medical midwifery in. But as the years pass, I start to get kind of lost and confused because the medical midwifery path seems almost more corrupt than the obstetrical path, which, that's a for sure no for me. And so I start to feel confused about what is really available, what my real calling is. And all the while I'm busy, I'm making good money, which is a classic kind of ethical issue I think birth workers come up against. I'm successful, I have social clout, I'm running a nonprofit, I have volunteers, I've fallen into this very heroic reformist consciousness that I now see I was perfectly groomed to play that part, just because that's mainstream birth culture and medical culture. It's the same consciousness as the nurse in many ways. So, towards the end of those 10 years, and I think what's sad and frustrating about my journey that now I'm very much hoping to rectify with what I do is I had no one to talk to. everywhere I looked, my mentors, my big sisters, they were all within the medical consciousness. And so there was an overwhelming sense reflected back to me of, shh, stop. Stop, that we don't think that way. We don't question that way. Yes, 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 that doctor always abuses our clients. Yes, we all know that. But no, we shouldn't say anything. It's not right to tell your future clients about that doctor. You don't want to project your story onto these women. I was told that a lot. Really messed up, real confused. Yeah, pretty gross, actually. Really, I would call it now very unsisterly. But I think all birth workers who work in the system, whether it's quickly or takes a while, hit this crossroads that I became very aware of hitting, where I had two options. I could either really double down on my cognitive dissonance and, yeah, lying to myself and stay the path, which felt in some ways safe and clear, or I could take the path less traveled that no one around me was saying it was okay to take and kind of leap into, I didn't have words back then for it. And I understand what it became for me, and it's created this whole big thing. But back then, that track of saying, this is wrong, there has to be a better way, was just blank. It was just, I had no idea what it would look like or what it would mean. And it felt very risky.
Emily, what was that final thing that pushed you over the edge? I was listening to you, and like I was crying with you, when you told your story, when you finally walked out and you were crying outside the hospital and you said you can't do this anymore.
Yeah, that week. I mean, it's really dark. That week, my last week of attending, I didn't know it would be my last week of attending. I knew I was getting closer and closer to that edge. But this last particular week, it just so happened that 3 different clients had their babies. And the timing worked out. I was with all of them. And they were all very different births. And all 3 of them were some of the most horrifically violent, haunting, abusive treatment I had seen, which is really saying something because I have a long list of horrific, horrific treatment to women and babies that I saw for a decade. But in this particular week, all 3 of them, and they were all very different situations in a way, also not, but one was a home birth transfer. One was an attempted VBAC that was never going to happen, and it was a repeat C-section. And then the other one was just a really, really disgusting. Yeah, I hardly have words for it. I don't know how gruesome you want me to be. I mean, I could tell you a little bit about the births if you
Sure, of
want
course.
to hear them. Because people don't know. Women, I often think that if women could see obstetrical birth, if women could see birth in L&D before they choose it, they would never choose it. Like if there's a rapist in your community, you don't go on a date with them.
Mm-hmm.
Most likely, that would be nuts.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. These doctors are just, some of them are just absolutely horrific, and you never know who you're going to get, right? It's not transparent at all. And there's a lot of ways that they work that you'll never find out until you're in labor. Anyway, so I go to these 3 births. Each are absolutely at a 10 of abuse. And yeah, I mean, maybe there was something about all 3 of them stacked together. I'd certainly seen plenty of obstetrical rape and women screaming for their babies as they're medically kidnapped. I mean, I'd certainly seen things like this before, but there was something about it going bam, bam, bam that I left the last hospital so sick, of course, right response, and just yeah, it was like, what am I doing? Like, I cannot expose myself to this anymore. But what's interesting about this, one of the layers that's interesting is how much deprogramming I had to do about being the good girl and the helper and the doula consciousness, which is also very similar to the nurse consciousness, is like, yeah, bad things are happening, but at least we're there. At
Yeah.
least we're holding their hand and we're there to hold her story and we'll help where we can. And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in that of not realizing that we're actually enabling the very system we think we're fighting against. And
Mhm.
so this just took me so long to figure out because I had no allies with language. I mean, I had my partner, but he was just witnessing. You know, he didn't like help me
Mhm.
untangle any of this. So I
Mhm.
was very alone figuring this out. And I think, it's definitely part of why it took 10 years and not 6 months or something.
Plus,
Because I see
you were still very young. I mean, you were a
totally.
teenager when you started, so even in your
Mhm.
20s, you were still very young.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Super young. And this is all pre-motherhood. And that was absolutely a critical piece here because at that end of the 10 years, I also was becoming ready to call my own child in. And that's really where the light bulb happens because it happened right in the same month of those three horrific births, or the treatment was horrific. I basically realized that I was ready to conceive, and I took a tally of every midwife I had been with. I had witnessed birth with all of them in LA. And so I knew what was available to me. And I also knew I wouldn't expose my baby and I to any of them. I had seen all of them do unethical stuff consistently. I had seen all of them act from fear and coerce and transfer unnecessarily and sabotage births. And so that was a very shocking realization that there was no one that I knew, and I had done it with I've been to births with everyone at that point. There was no one that felt safe for me and my baby. And as I started to explore why that really was, that was when I started to understand where this all goes. I started to understand or put the pieces together about rules and regulations and licensure and the training, of course, and the pathology based training. And as I started to put all of that together, I had this real epiphany in my kitchen that the only way to actually take full responsibility and protect my baby and I for optimal birth was to birth alone, which was not crazy to me.
Yeah.
That was totally a wild idea. I wasn't like thrilled by the idea. It just was obvious.
Did your partner support you in this?
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
No, I don't mess with I don't mess with, men who don't understand
Final
their
baby.
roles
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
places.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good
Yeah.
for you. Mhm.
Yeah, so all of that kind of happened at the same time, which was about 10, 11 years ago now, where I realized, well, wait a minute. If I wouldn't birth with any of these providers, how on earth is it ethical that I'm accepting money from these women around LA and going with them to their births with all these people? Like, hold on. And then so I just spent a lot of time in those couple of months. It was very dark. It was very scary. It was very confusing. And I just did my best to put these pieces together. And eventually I arrive very clear that what I was doing was wildly out of integrity. Attending these births, accepting money on the premise that I somehow could advocate for them was a total lie. It's just that it was a lie I believed,
Right.
which is where it gets
Right.
tricky.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Mhm.
intentionally deceiving anyone, of course not. I loved
Mhm.
mothers and babies, I thought I was on my path. So all of this comes together. I have this, huge turning of the wheel in my consciousness, realize that I will birth outside of the medical system. And that quickly leads me to realize I can't attend births in the medical system, which is worth saying here. That is not allowed in birth culture. That is not allowed socially. That is not allowed among midwives and doulas. You are not allowed to attend a birth without a medical provider. That is social suicide.
Right.
And I knew it. And so that was another aspect that's worth mentioning because I now know, having mentored, hundreds and hundreds of birth workers around the world, I know that one of the reasons they stay in the system is because of that, is because they will lose their friends, their clout, their respect. Um, you know, it's risky. There's a lot of social risk to doing something so,
So
yeah,
let me
not
just
allowed.
ask you, so you're pregnant, you conceived, you're pregnant, and you have this community around you of medical midwives, and they're like what, breathing down your neck, saying, well,
Oh, no, no,
are we
no.
gonna, no?
No, no, no. So I I don't conceive yet. I get all my
Oh,
ducks in a row.
okay.
I have been waiting to be a mother my entire life, and so I wasn't gonna mess it up. So I get clear on what I'm doing or not doing with the birth work. I tell my husband I can't be in LA for a pregnancy. I need to go be in the woods. I have so much secondary trauma from what I had been seeing for a decade. I needed to unwind that and just living in
Yeah.
LA. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
hardcore to your nervous system.
Yeah.
And so I knew I needed a major uh, deregulation process. I wanted it, for my baby. And so my husband got a job in the weed industry up in Northern California, which is gorgeous up there. So we left LA. I closed out my nonprofit, I closed out my business and got out of there. Go up, hide in the woods. I spent a lot of time in that pregnancy just alone, walking in the woods, watching the animals, very quiet, doing what I needed to do to shake that decade off me, that city off
Mhm.
me. And in that time, well, right before that time, I went to India, which is a very important place to me. I've spent a lot of time there and spent a lot of time kind of figuring out what it was going to look like for me in birth work now that I knew what my no was. And I was really ready to own my no. And yeah, I got clear I wanted to start a podcast that interviewed women who birthed outside the medical system. I had no idea if anyone was going to be interested. It was a little selfish of me because I wanted to be juiced up by these stories, because I didn't know anyone who had birthed this way. And so I started a little Facebook group for the pod, came up with a name, and I converted my website into coaching, primarily still doing birth trauma debriefs because I have always done those. And yeah, I loved working with mothers, and it was a way that I could virtually still, I still had a lot of ties to relationships in LA, and people were still referring to me all the time. So it was a way I could convert, people into a different way of having clients and still make some money in my pregnancy. And so yeah, so now that takes us to we conceive, and I release the podcast. I'm just kind of poaching little small unassisted birth groups on Facebook saying, hey, does anyone want to tell their story on my podcast? I'm thinking maybe a couple women may listen to it. I have very low expectations about it. And, you know, within a year, it goes totally viral. I mean, it just spread like wildfire. It was crazy what then happens and, kind of becomes the gates to everything else. Turns out women are very interested in hearing stories of women birthing in power. And my intention with the podcast was to create a virtual archive so that we don't lose these stories. They were very hard to find. They're not hard to find anymore, largely thanks to the podcast. And it was really important to me, both selfishly and for all women and future mothers. I wanted somewhere that was intentionally recording these stories. I mean, so that brings us to the birth of Freebirth Society. The first season of the podcast tracks along with my pregnancy, which is totally outside the system. And I share some of that on the podcast. The first wild pregnancy, that's the term for it. Pregnancy as an integrated part of life, where you don't engage the medical system, no labs, no technology, no surveillance, none of that. The first one was quite heady. I had a lot to work out. I had a lot of deprogramming to do. Yeah.
Can you walk
It
us
really,
through like the first free birth? That was
sure.
your name, right? How like
Mm-hmm.
how the process is? Because I mean, I had a home birth in Toronto. I was more scared of the medical system than anything else. I've never been to a hospital, so giving birth scared me, but not as much as going to a hospital. And back then there
Totally.
was no internet. This was almost 28 years ago. So I was like reading books and books and books, and everyone said you're crazy, you're gonna die, your baby's gonna die. But luckily my husband supported me. And I did have I had midwives present. And I didn't even like at that point until I heard your podcast, I did not realize there was even another option. The midwives were already, I was like so happy
Right.
that I could have a home birth. And I was lucky because there was no medical intervention or anything like that. They had the equipment, it was sitting like in the corner of the room in case there was an emergency, but they just pretty much let me do my thing. It wasn't invasive in any way.
So were they government supplied midwives?
Um, I would think so. I would assume so. Yes, because it didn't cost me any money or anything like that. So I had no doctor, no medical,
Yeah.
you know,
But they were government agents. Like
yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
I'm trying to think of what I know about 28 years ago in Canada
Yeah, you weren't even born
because
yet.
now I'm familiar with the
Yes.
rules and regulations of a Canadian registered midwife, but maybe it was less hardcore
Yeah,
28
it was
years
that I'm
ago.
sure it was.
Yeah,
And
I think it was. Yeah.
even when he's born, the vitamin K, I think that's the injection that they do as soon as the baby's born. They're like, we can just spray it in the air. And like
Weird.
they were very open to
Mhm,
everything. So nothing was
mhm.
forced on us. So I think mentally
And so
they were
your
there.
memory is that you had no vaginal exams. They never took heart tones. Like that
They
just
didn't.
seems really
I
unlikely.
don't think they took heart tones. But they did examine me just to see how dilated I am. That's the only. And then I had a water birth, and it all went very quickly and everything. No, not that I remember. But I did. So it was
Yeah,
fine.
it's what's coming up for me is that, and I don't know anything about your birth, but a lot of women will tell me that they had hands-off midwives and had no interventions,
Yes.
and then they'll show me their birth video
Mhm.
and they had a ton of interventions.
I do
They
have the birth
just
video, so maybe it's different.
we should maybe watch it.
Yeah, I need to watch it
Because
again.
and why this is powerful to unpack is that we are so, first of all, our bar is so low as women. And we're so grateful that to have home births with midwives, to not be at the hospital. And this may or may not be true for you specifically, but I find this to be really common is women don't even know what interventions are. Like a vaginal exam is a really big deal.
Yeah.
There's no scientific benefit to it. It's incredibly disruptive. Anyway, so I mean that's a major intervention. And because you had that, I'm like,
Mhm.
I would bet $1,000 you had more interventions and you just didn't track them as that,
Quite
you know?
possibly, yes.
Because if they're registered midwives, they are medical obstetrical midwives, they are bound to do certain things. But in a birth, when a mother's consciousness is so blown open and she is so hyper focused on her own experience, she doesn't necessarily track and remember everything that happens. I've been to so many births with medical midwives where afterwards the mom tells me, "What a great hands-off midwife." And I'm like, what? Like, she shot you with
Mhm.
Pitocin. Like, she put Cytotec up your rectum. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, she did?
Yeah.
They don't even know. Or she tractioned your cord, and she pulled your placenta out, or she did fundal massage. Like, all of that stuff isn't mother led.
Yes.
And anyway, so nothing, I know nothing about your birth. I'm not saying any
No,
of
no,
that.
no. I'm glad you're saying all this. And like I said, it
Yeah,
was like a light bulb went on for me when I was listening to you because I'm like, oh, okay. So there's like a whole other level.
Oh yeah,
And it made so much sense to me because I mean, we've been birthing like that forever,
literally.
right? So
And
I mean, we have,
I forgot to say something that's really important about my LA time. Before I left, I started attending sovereign birth. This is very important. I can't believe I
uh-huh.
forgot this. So when I got my clear no, before I conceived my baby, there was a time period where it just happened. I think God really was, I think there was this time where I was really shifting out of karma and into dharma, and things were just lining up in as I found my yes and as I was clear on my no. And so the short version of this is I would still talk to women who wanted me to be their doulas, and I would tell them, on the phone, thank you so much for your interest. So excited you're pregnant. I no longer attend births with medical providers, and I'm happy to share why. I wouldn't force it on them. And I'd say, and I'm happy to share why if you want to hear more. And if you're interested in birthing without medical providers, we can talk about that. And I'd say about 50% of them would go, tell me more. And so I'd say, well, I've been doing this for 10 years and I've seen a lot of abuse and a lot of unnecessary C-sections. And, I'd had like a little like thing I would share. And I'm just more interested in supporting women who want to have physiological births in optimal birth environments of their home without the rules and regulations of the medical model. And so of that amount who wanted to hear me out, a portion of them would say, "Why don't you come over? Let's have a talk with my husband." And then those women wound up hiring me to witness them in what I would call a sovereign birth. So, why this is important is after 10 years of attending births after births after births, I started attending mother-led births where there were no vaginal exams, where there was no suggestion that she moves after the birth, where there was no pushing on her back, where there was no assessment, nothing. It was just me and the parents. And it was like I was seeing birth for the first time. It was completely different. Women became wild. They
Mm.
became instinctual. It was completely different than birthing in captivity, a phrase by my elder. Her name is Sister Morningstar. And she talks about this epic comparison of like even in the zoos, the zookeepers know you leave the giraffe alone. But in human, culture right now, it's the complete opposite. So birthing in captivity is
I
all I
made a
had.
note that's got to be the title of this episode. I love that. Birthing in captivity. Sorry, I just had to write it down before I forget.
It's a great
That's
phrase, and
brilliant.
it's
Brilliant.
it
Mhm.
really pisses a lot of people off. And it's exactly what it is, because even accidental unassisted births, there's still a consciousness of captivity because she thinks a doctor should be there. So she's terrified, and I've been to those births as well. But starting to attend births where women wanted to be self-led, to be witnessed, not managed, was completely different. And it absolutely rearranged my consciousness. And so I did that very quietly. Almost no one knew. I was scared. I didn't even know if it was legal to be doing it.
Yeah.
I was very quiet about it, and I just kept saying yes. It just kind of kept happening, and it was completely changing my brain and what I understood and what was allowed and how much wider the variations of normal really are. And all of a sudden I was attending women where they were making the decisions for themselves. Like, shocker, they were deciding everything like adults and not being infantilized. So that's an important piece to this because, birth work is inside out work. It's like whatever's going on in my birth work is going on in my life. It's all, I don't know how to compartmentalize them. So this awakening was happening within me as a woman and a future mother, and then also as really a midwife. I didn't use that word yet because I was confused about it all. And I thought the word midwife was co-opted, which it has been. I'm a bit more loose with that word now because this is the work of midwifery, real midwifery,
Yes.
not government mandated midwifery. That's a psyop. That's a total psyop.
Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast about
Mhm.
the satanic ritual that birth is. And
Yeah. Yes. So Emilee, I'm a psychiatrist and I was trained in the medical system. And of course I had to go through my obstetrics training as an intern. And I'm very glad you're putting into words what I experienced just witnessing how the medical system treated the pregnant women, because I knew intuitively it was a horror. I could just feel myself
Of course.
just rear up inside, and I could not, of course, speak. There was no, as you experienced, nobody there who would listen to my reality or validate it. And I remember, for example, seeing how we had to line up as little interns and stick our finger into the vagina, and it was just like, oh my God. And the woman was like treated like she was a piece of furniture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And things like watching them just snip to cut the episiotomy. Oh my God. And I have before I encountered your work, a few years ago I started listening to podcasts about free birth, and I thought that is amazing because you're right. You are those women are in captivity in the hospital system, and they regress to being completely terrified, almost like little children, things being done to them. It is a horror to perceive. I was there also at the hospital birth of a friend of mine, and I couldn't believe how she regressed. Yeah. It was horrible. She was screaming at her husband, please take me home, take me home, take me home. And then when I heard the stories, which you've heard so many of the women who were allowed to have their sovereign births, completely different experience, right? Like I couldn't believe it. And it felt so intuitively right that they went into a state of being completely wild and free and totally intuitive. And they already knew how to do it, right? That
even if that sovereign birth, she's kicking and screaming and she's terrified, that's fine too. It's a spiritual experience. But what happens on the other side, once she's brought her baby forth and she has lived to tell the tale, so to speak,
right.
the integration process of I fucking did it is such a big deal, because the biggest story on this planet of women and our mothers, the last couple generations, is I couldn't do it. I needed help. I needed a C-section. The baby almost died. I almost died. The doctor saved me. There's such a deep wound in our culture story. Very successful, very intentional. I mean, this isn't just random that this happens, and that this story happens right as obstetrics, monopolizes birth. Obviously, it's all very perfectly organized, very successful campaign. But it's quite rampant. Obviously 95% of women, birth and they choose. They don't even know they can choose, and they choose to birth in the hospitals. They don't even know it's abuse. I mean, this shit is dark. It runs so deep. But you can't talk about this without acknowledging that we are groomed for sexual assault from the beginning. We are groomed to outsource to the white coat, to men, to authority figures as girls, and so they're just playing out what different iterations of it has been happening their whole life.
Yeah. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's very dark. And what's so epic about birth is you don't have to do anything. it's not a intellectual path, it's a biological function. And so any woman with a uterus and a baby in it, if she just stays home, if she allows the biological functions, to happen, she will birth, right? And so I love that so much about birth because I think it is intrinsic to the design of birth for our consciousness to raise and for us to know ecstasy and to know power, which also makes sense why it's so successfully staunched,
Yeah.
and of course, right? It's pretty obvious. It's all right there. But what I
Hmm.
see in I also want to make a distinction just for anyone new to this concept. Free birth is birth, intentional birth happening in the absence of birth professionals. So I don't attend free birth because I'm a midwife. I do the work of midwifery. And so if someone hires me at their birth, they're choosing to hire a birth professional. I'm not a medical professional, but I'm certainly an authority in birth. I've dedicated my whole life to it. That's why someone would want me at their birth. So when I'm at a birth, they're having a sovereign birth. It's independent of the medical system, but a midwife is at their birth. So I choose to free birth where I don't want any birth professionals. But there is
Okay.
a difference because in the consciousness, it is very different to not have anyone there. I want that because I want to face myself entirely. And this might sound a little bit contradictory and it is kind of heady, but I do believe the only way you can take full responsibility for your birth is to free birth because there is an inherent outsourcing when you hire a midwife. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong at all. People hire
Hmm.
me. I go to births, happily. So there's nothing wrong with that. Most first-time moms want a witness, they want a guide, they want a woman who's walked this path. Totally understandable. And there is a level of outsourcing in that dynamic that really can't be denied. It's not wrong, it's not bad, but I do think it's interesting, something I think a lot about.
So Emilee, can you walk us through what you do when you're hired by a woman to who's intending to have a free birth? What then is your role? What do you do?
Well, so if someone is hiring me and they want to have a free birth, then I would just be coaching them prenatally. I would be
Hmm.
debriefing. I'm not attending their birth. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I do a lot of that coaching. Women want, especially long distance, women want to birth on their own and they want to debrief previous births in the system. They want to learn what they need to learn. Maybe their partners at the sessions as well. And so that would be like coaching and education. And then they go have their birth. She goes and has her birth. And then in terms of attending birth, someone might hire me as a midwife. And so she wants to have a sovereign birth. She's having a wild pregnancy, most likely, and she would like me at her birth. And so does that make sense? And so that's not a free
Hmm.
birth.
Yeah. But
Um,
Right.
are you just a witness there? Are you just witnessing the birth or are you helping as well?
well, I'm working my ass off, but it's midwifery
Yes.
without the medical model. So I would never do a vaginal exam. I don't bring anything. I don't bring resuscitation. I don't bring Pitocin. I don't bring drugs to a woman's birth.
Yeah.
But if you just go 3 generations back and look at what midwives did,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a bit of a fantasy historically of how there's like a utopian kind of perspective of traditional midwifery, and it was not all rainbows and butterflies. Every culture had some pretty whack, harmful practices, that you can read about in the old texts. But so in a way, I think it's possible that the way I attend is actually kind of new. But what it looks like, gosh, what does it look like? I mean, it's it could look a million different ways depending on the mother, her personality, her dynamic with everyone there. I might be just holding space quietly and offering a reassuring, uh, note here and there, but you're managing the entire space without anyone knowing, right? I mean, they might think I didn't do much, and that would be a perfect example of a great birth keeper.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of a recent birth I went to where she was a first time mom and many hours away. So by the time I showed up, she was already towards the end of her birth process, doing great with her husband, had the baby. But in that first hour after birth, she was a first time mom and she wanted a lot of guidance, which is common with first time moms. It's not always the case. You know, you get more confidence with every baby. You know, you've done it before. And anyway, so she got out of the tub and she was bleeding quite a lot. Um, I would say we were entering into the realms of excessive bleeding, not hemorrhage, but excessive bleeding, which is a complication that, in my experience, can be dealt with at home. She was bleeding a lot, and it was definitely making the husband nervous. And the move is get the placenta out. That's what needs to happen next, with that kind of bleeding. And she wasn't feeling great, but it wasn't like scary or anything. Anyway, and so this just is an example of that's probably a story that if I hadn't have been there, they probably would have gotten freaked out and called 911. My
Mhm.
guess is because they didn't know what
Mhm.
to do. Um, yeah. And so that's just an example of, I mean, I do know what to do. And so I would take leadership at that point, but it's all completely non-medical. So I'm just telling her what's going to happen and that we're going to, you're going to get into a squat and you're going to pull your, cord and you're going to birth your placenta and then we're going to get you cuddly in bed, nursing your baby. And yep, all this blood looks, great. It all has to come out some, in some way, but let's go ahead and work on the placenta. And, we're getting her food, we're getting her water, maybe helping her to the bathroom to release her bladder. I mean, none of this is like that interesting. Um, it is kind of hard to articulate because it doesn't sound like much, but you're regulating the whole space. I mean, they're
Yeah.
looking at your face if
Mhm.
if
Yeah.
everything's okay or not.
It's like when you're
Um,
Yeah.
flying and you're looking at the flight attendants during turbulence, right?
that's funny.
I always do that. If they're calm, I'm calm, even when the plane's going like this. So I think,
That's funny. I mean, even if things weren't looking good, I would still be calm.
yeah,
No matter what.
yeah.
There's always a calm way, to deal with it. But anyway, so I do a lot of stuff. I'm letting them know kind of what the next thing is. I'm helping establish breastfeeding, but everyone's so different. Some women just have it. And so I'm more like making food and cleaning up, and it's not that interesting, taking some pictures,
Mhm.
helping burn the cord. And then some women need a lot of support, and they're very freaked out, and their partners are checked out, and there's kids, there's already other kids all around, or so it's sometimes hard for people to imagine midwifery without all the medical stuff, you know?
Yeah,
It is mother led. And in some ways, it's not dissimilar to what doulas do now, but I believe doulas do the work of midwifery.
and Emily, what are you seeing in the children after a free birth? How are they different from like a hospital birth or?
Yeah. I mean, a really common thing mothers will tell me if they first have C-sections, or heavily drugged births or NICU stays, whatever the normal thing, and then they have their free birth, they will often comment on the difference. The Yeah, first I want to say babies still have their personalities.
Mhm.
Like babies still come in with who they are. And
Yeah.
so they might still be feisty or hate sleeping. It's not like free birth equals some docile, perfect, easy infant at all,
Yeah,
which I think some people expect. But on a much deeper level, healthy attachment is present from the beginning, right? There's no drugs, there's no disruption, there's no fracture, there's no trauma. And so an intact mother baby plays out a very different way. They're co-regulated in a totally different way. The child doesn't have to overcome, right? Like they get to start, how would I say it? These babies in the hospital, they have to overcome their births. They are starting from a depleted state,
yeah,
hormonally, spiritually, physically. There's so much is taken from them. And so they have to overcome that and survive in spite of it. And these babies don't have to do that. So I see way more contentedness. A contented infant is probably the best way I could say it. They still have their personalities, but they are healthier. They get sick less. I mean, just kind of the obvious stuff. They're okay to be away from their mother at appropriate times. They nurse with ease. Like the obvious things you would expect to
Would the
see.
women also have less postpartum depression?
Oh my gosh, of course. It's very rare. It's very
Mhm.
rare that
Mhm.
that I hear of a woman kind of self-diagnosing herself with postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, except women are still exactly who they are, even if they free birth. So women who, I can think of a couple of women who I've known or coached throughout the years who already had battled with depression or had a bad life setup. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
it's still, you're still in your life.
Mhm.
So it's not
Mhm.
like a magical cure-all, but
Yeah.
it is a very high place to launch from, if you get to
Emily,
have that
in the
experience.
medical system, why is it that they tell you once you had a C-section, you can't have a natural birth after that? Because you just mentioned the lady, right? Someone that would have like a C-section and then have a free birth at home.
There's no money in that.
Yeah.
That's
What
right.
what
You're
you think
absolutely
you
on the
think
money there.
of course.
So there's no medical reason. Like my cousin is pregnant right now with her
No.
second baby. She had a
No.
C-section for the first one, and they said no, you don't even have the option to have a natural
First of all, if you ask a surgeon their opinion, what do
birth.
you think a surgeon's going to say?
Yeah. Do surgery.
Okay?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So that's that. Of course, like, have you ever heard a surgeon go, "You should have a natural birth. You know what? Don't
Yeah,
even come here."
yeah,
Of course not. Of course not. So, it's like multi-layered. People really take what doctors say like at face value, and it's crazy to not be more uh critical about the context in
Yeah.
which they would be saying it. It's also so chill for them to schedule a surgery, show up for
Yeah.
40 minutes, make in
Yeah.
well, everywhere is different, but like in hospitals in America, some hospitals get paid per procedure. So
Mhm.
it's really unethical because they actually make more money to cut you.
Money. That's right.
Not all hospitals are like that, but some are. Yeah, and it's controllable in a way that, I mean, there's no natural birth in the hospital. That's not even possible. It's not on the
Mhm.
table. It's a lie.
Yeah.
There can be birth without drugs, but
Mm.
that's not a natural birth. A natural birth can only happen in the context of a woman's den,
Yeah.
in her
Yeah.
home. It can't happen outside of that for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, so there's no money in it. There's no incentive. It's what they're taught. It's what feels safe to them because they are God and they would like to control it. And it is easiest, though I would argue a bit against it, but they think it's easiest to control it through an elective C-section. Yeah, it's really dark.
Have
And
you
then people just
So
believe it.
Emily, sorry.
Yeah.
I was always intrigued by the question, why are there so many male obstetricians? Like, what is it for them that makes them want to do this? They're never going to have a baby. They're never going to have the incredible experience of giving birth. So I was always so amazed. Why this is a woman's thing. Why are so many men getting into it? You're right. Yeah, money. I get it.
No, it's
But
more than that. I mean,
yeah.
I think it's fetish. I think
Really?
it's
Okay. Okay.
perverse. I mean, I think you have to be a huge pervert. I think it's
Uh-huh.
really perverse to choose this track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, and the whole industry is founded on abuse of women.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. All the instruments are torture instruments. It is a misogynistic, abusive, violent industry. So
Yeah.
that tracks. I mean, that's what men are
Yeah.
known for, it tracks.
Mhm.
I think power dynamics, obviously, just the doctor persona is incredibly attractive to a power hungry misogynist. you know I mean, it fits the type. Yeah. And I think the hero dynamic too, the god complex, it's just perfect. It just really fits.
Mm.
It's really gross.
What do you think
Yeah.
about like pap smears and gynecological exams for women? Like I haven't had one in 30 years.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
find it so invasive and I find
Yeah, it's barbaric.
and once they
It
go
is
in
barbaric. Yeah.
and they will always find something wrong because these are pre-cancerous cells, whatever those are,
Right.
right?
Pre.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pre-cancerous cells, or we are
Nonsense.
seeing abnormal cells and we need to investigate further. I'm like, why would I put my body through that?
Yeah.
So, people are always going for their mammograms, pap smears, all this, and it's like, how can you not go? How can you not do that? But I mean, I don't want to be any part of that system.
No.
Nothing.
What's fun about free birth as a pivot point for women is it really wakes them up and has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
So once a woman free births, it's very common that she's like, what else am I doing that's not mother led or that's not intuitive? What I see in our community, I mean, all over the world, I see women not send their kids to pediatricians, stop sending their kids to public school, make major life changes, like get out of corporate America, leave their abusive husband, finally cut out their toxic mom. I mean, cure their bulimia. Like
Mhm.
major shifts are normal in the aftermath of stop wearing makeup, stop wearing high heels, stop shaving. There's just this ripple effect of embodiment, which totally makes sense because she's accessed her power in a really major way, and that doesn't just happen in a vacuum. She's then going to mother her child in more embodiment and intuition, so she's going to question things and stop just doing what she's told. So that's why I focus on women and why I got out of the consciousness of reform, because I don't care if gynos are over there offering it. I would like women to know they don't have to choose it, and if you want to choose it, do your thing. Live your life however you want. I don't care. But most women haven't yet stopped to really think and investigate if this is actually intuitively what they want. And when I see women start to do that, it's like they just apply it to everything. It's so exciting.
It's amazing.
Well, they get rewilded, just like the
Rewilded.
title of our
Exactly.
podcast.
Yeah, I love the title because it's I think about the wild woman archetype a lot because we are born into captivity, like we said, and we are born tamed. We
Yeah.
are so tamed as females in this society. And then some of us are on this path to learn how to become untamed,
Yeah.
and it's addressing so much within us. There's such deep grooming around the good girl and the people pleaser, and to shut up.
Yeah.
And it's just been so fascinating for me in my personal journey to rise to power and share it and experience the hate and the death threats and the rape threats and the rumors and the jealousy, and just wow, like standing in who I am unapologetically and how that has triggered people in the world has just been a fascinating experience, because people do not like wild women. you know
That's true. Yeah.
no, they would like you to be quiet, and it's very, yeah, it's just been so interesting to learn what what it means to be embodied, or at least on that track. I don't know if I could totally claim it, um and to be unapologetically myself and to speak my truth. And I mean, that's a whole nother piece to this, that is not for the faint of heart. And
Yeah.
it's really taught me a
I,
lot
I
about.
think I think it is truly a hero journey for you now, right? That's what it sounds like. And do you find that having gone through all of this, you're less you are not intimidated by what other people think. You're much less intimidated.
Oh
You're
yeah.
much less, yeah, you couldn't care less in many cases, I
Yeah.
imagine, right?
I
Yeah.
couldn't care less. I mean, I've always kind of been that way, to be honest. I've always just had an innate quality of confidence thank God. I don't know why or where, but
Probably because of your mother, what you said about your mother.
totally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that recently. My mom is not vain,
Mm-hmm.
and I've really learned in my adulthood how many women have vain mothers,
Mm-hmm.
really insecure vain mothers, and just what a gift that was as her daughter
Mm-hmm.
to not see a vain, insecure mother. Just,
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely helped. Anyway, but yeah, that's been a whole nother piece to this, that having Freebirth Society blow up and me kind of being the first one to take this to the level that I have, those first couple years was really intense. I had no idea how the public arena was going to respond, and it was vicious. It's still vicious, but I'm way more like alchemized to it. And I work with a set of tools that have, yeah, just really helped me understand what's not personal. And, this is just a part of being a vibrant woman on this planet, you
Sure.
Yeah,
know?
that's
Standing in your truth. That's it. Yes.
yeah,
You just
yeah.
stand in your truth and you're attacked. Yeah.
And there's such
Um,
power in that. And
Emilee, I wanted to ask you, I have I have a client who is a midwife, medical midwife. And I think I was really, my eyes were really opened to the brutality that the medical midwives experience in their work and how they're traumatized as well. I wonder if you could speak a little
Totally.
bit about what you know about the how this impacts the medical midwives.
Do you mean in their training, or that they are
And also
obligated to abuse women?
at all the whole thing, because it's
Yeah,
all one of a piece. They can't
right.
escape getting traumatized. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the same thing, I keep mentioning nurses because it's not dissimilar, that
Yeah.
these women, I think, with really good intention, enter these fields. And I think, they have often the bleeding heart or that kind of martyr archetype in them, and they really want to help. And I think it's very well intended in the vast majority of women, both in nursing and in medical midwifery. Um, and so I think it's very predatory, this whole system and the tracks and the paths and the presentation of it, because it takes well-meaning women, and it's really dark, trains them to participate in violence, woman on woman violence, and to
Yeah.
actually carry water for patriarchal obstetrical harm. I mean, I've known so many midwives in LA who I would try to talk about this with them, and they would say things like, we do what we can. Like, yes, we know that by being licensed, it means that we can't serve all women. So we just serve the women we can, and we just hope that'll make a difference. I'm like, wow, that is some weak ass shit.
yeah,
There's a radical feminist quote that I love it goes something like, if it doesn't work for all women, it doesn't work.
good one.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, medical midwives, how can you not be traumatized when you are, first of all, the training is psychological warfare. I mean, if you're doing CNM training where you have to do shifts, in the system, like similar to what you did and saw, you are being trained witnessing abuse and
Yeah.
dehumanizing women. I mean, you
Mhm.
guys standing in the line and fingering these women as if they're cows or something. It's so
Mhm.
dehumanizing, and that chips away at the psyche. It's you have to dehumanize these women in order to treat them this way.
That's right.
If you were actually eye to eye, heart to heart, there's no fucking way you would do this
Right.
to another
That's
human
exactly
being.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know what else I have to say about it. And then they justify it. There's a whole culture around it. And back to what I said earlier about the crossroads, I think medical midwifery has the same thing where they hit a track where their animal body has to know it's wrong.
Mhm.
Your animal body has to know, just like yours did. But now they've spent so much money on their school, and they're in debt, and they're on a track, and they have a kid, and they need to provide, and they just
Yes. Yes, you are spot on with that. They are caught in the way that you felt
Yeah.
caught. Right,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And it is a lot about, well, I can't afford not to
Mm-hmm.
work.
So
And
it's that
the other thing,
crossroads. So then they
mhm,
choose from a survival scarcity standpoint, they
yeah,
choose cognitive dissonance and
mhm,
double down and focus and lie and make up crazy excuses like we just serve who we can. And
yeah,
that's why then when I come on the scene, people are like, burn that witch. How dare she? Because I represent freedom, and I make more money than I ever made in the system, living my
right.
truth, acting in integrity. And that really drives
Mhm,
people nuts.
Well
yeah,
done for you. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. That's how it should
yeah.
be. Imagine if all women were like you. Imagine what a world
Mhm,
we could have. It would be absolutely incredible.
You
Emilee,
know,
mhm.
I wanted to ask you, have you helped any women who are in countries where home births are not allowed at all, where they're
well,
illegal?
it's an interesting question because I think there's a lot of confusion around free birth or home birth being illegal. I'm not convinced that it is truly illegal to have a biological event outside of a hospital.
Mhm,
But culturally, people believe things are illegal that aren't actually illegal. Like culturally, it is not allowed
mhm,
to free birth anywhere.
mhm,
Not in Canada, not here, not in Saudi Arabia. Like nowhere is it cool to walk into a hospital and for the paperwork like you have to do in a lot of places in the Middle East. The only way you can get a birth certificate is to go into the hospital. And so, yeah, there's nowhere that you can just go in and be like, oh, I free birth. I didn't want to come in, but could I get the paperwork? And they're like, congratulations. Like,
yeah,
no. Here they're calling CPS, they're giving you shit everywhere. So I have coached women, yes, in tons of countries. I mean, maybe most countries. And if it's free birth, so you can criminalize medical midwifery. Or sorry, let me say that again. You can make midwifery be illegal.
yes.
That is the thing you can make it really dangerous or illegal or scary to attend birth.
Mhm,
But it's much harder to criminalize a woman who accidentally drops a baby in 20 minutes.
mhm,
Like,
yeah,
so, but you still have to play it smart. I mean, it's very challenging in Japan, it's very challenging in Cuba. There's definitely countries that that are more involved and are heavier on the reporting or on the, yeah, making it really difficult. But women have always found ways, and lots of women in those places, they play it dumb. They, I mean, the classic line is, I always intended to come in, the baby just
yeah,
came too fast.
yeah,
What are they going to say to that? I
yeah,
mean, fast births do happen,
they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
but more than that, a lot of the coaching I've done is women, or
Mhm.
an interesting branch of it is women who are in really oppressive marriages or cultures who would rather die than have another C-section. And so I've worked with women, yeah, in all sorts of places who really want to they want help gaming out how to secretly have a free birth, which is pretty intense and
Yeah.
sad. But they do it.
they do it.
They do it. They send their husband to work. They pretend they're not having sensations. It's pretty wild. It's
Do
but
you
it really it speaks to how desperate women are for this
yeah.
and how serious surgical birth is. I mean, to rob a woman of that.
Because
And
instinctively you know what's right. You know what's right for your body and for your baby. And then we're
you can
conditioned
hear
to
it.
believe something else. Do you
Yeah.
find that the women usually have their partners with them or they prefer to birth alone?
Oh yeah. I mean, it just depends on the dynamic of the couple, right?
Yeah.
So I would say most partners are invited and support in a way, bringing the water,
Hmm.
filling the birth pool, whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, many men aren't willing to hold that space, don't have the capacity for that, aren't that, kind of guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've met women at hotel rooms to have their
At
baby.
hotel rooms. Wow.
I mean, I
Wow.
wouldn't do that anymore, but I used to kind of say yes to anyone back in the day
Huh.
when I was first doing this. And, I now have a boundary, I guess you could call it. I don't work with couples with abusive men,
Mhm.
but I used to serve because I felt so bad for them. I used to try to make it work, but it was too risky. It was too dangerous.
Yeah.
Must be like a really difficult situation if the woman wants a free birth and then the husband is dead set against it. That's a very difficult situation.
Well, and then I would say for a more healthy dynamic, the woman will just do it anyway,
Mhm.
and he can just deal with it. And then
Yeah.
he kind of deals with it and it's fine. But when we get into an abusive dynamic, yeah, it's a whole different thing. And if he controls her life and is violent and is dangerous to her and her other children, it's a whole different thing. So, but I still have known those women, whether I've attended them or coached them, who find a way, because many women have told me that they actually rather die than ever be treated the way they were treated in the hospital again.
And you advocate for water births?
I don't care.
Either way.
Whatever. Yeah.
Do you think it's better, easier, whatever?
I mean, everyone's just so different. Some
Yeah.
women, I hate being in the water. I feel caged in there.
Mhm.
Some women love it and can find their zen, whatever. To me, it's about create a playground in your living space and then just see how you feel, because you can't possibly know how you feel. So it's nice to just have options.
Yeah.
Um, but
And do
I'm
you
a
have like
creative.
music playing in the background? That's all individual as well.
I can't. For me,
No?
no. It's way too intense. I just
Oh
need
yeah.
to but some people do. I mean, I
Yeah, I
had a
had
really long
Enya
birth.
playing and I still have that playing, the songs in my head. That was like so
Yeah.
calming for me.
I
Um,
had my own songs playing in my head in
wow.
my last birth, a very specific one that it was the only thing I could keep hearing, but it was just in my memory. Um, but
What
yeah, I
song,
mean,
what song was it?
it's a song my friend wrote. It's just a short little, it's a song, yeah, just a couple of lines about water. That's super beautiful. That I had been listening to a lot. But the point is, women should do whatever they want.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
point. You should go outside if you want to. You should have your mom there if you want. You should be alone if you want. You should just do whatever you want. And if you can learn how to listen to that and give yourself permission to actually live your life the way you want and feel called to,
Yeah.
it's going to be better. So birth is an example of that. And what's fun about birth is that it becomes so intense, obviously, at some point, that you see these really meek kind of people pleasing women start barking orders and start, you know, clawing up the walls and start demanding things. And it's like, yes, yes, let
That's
that
amazing.
out.
That is amazing. I know you have to go soon. Do you have any final questions, Lucille?
I could ask
I
questions
know.
forever. I mean,
I,
Emilee has such an amazing amount of wisdom and experience, but I will allow Emilee to get on with the rest of her day.
we love your energy, Emilee, so much.
Yeah,
Work that
yeah,
you're doing is so incredible for all women. Like on behalf of all
yeah.
women on this planet, we thank you.